My name is Lila Tachtsi, and I am working for Atkins, Director for Transport Asset Management, but I am here wearing a very different hat today. I'm wearing the hat of the chair of the UK committee, National Committee of the World Road Association. So that's why my presentation will have two separate parts. The first one, which is going to be the larger part of the presentation, is about WRA itself, or PR, as some people might know it. So what is it and why it is an important player on the international arena? And then I'm going to talk about the low-carbon transport agenda and a special project that we have commissioned and was completed only in a couple of weeks ago about electric road systems. So, do you know what is the World Road Association? No? That's a good place to be then. The World Road Association is a non-political and non-profit making organization. It's very much an organization that wants to promote the development of skills, raising the profile of people that work in the road sector, and focuses very much on making sure that we exchange best practice, we work at an international level all together to promote the road sector. That means, of course, that it is an international organization. It has representation from countries from all around the world, broad membership from governments as well as public sector, and very recently we managed to revise our vision in the thing that you can see there. So I am going to read it because it's quite important. We want to be the world leader in the exchange of knowledge on roads and road transport policy and practices within the context of integrated and sustainable transport. So very much want to move the road sector forward around the world. So I don't know why it's not moving. There it is. We've got 4 key missions, and I think it's important to understand what these are. We're very much about providing a forum where people can speak openly and transparently about the work they are doing in the transport sector. So there are a lot of different mechanisms that are put in place to encourage and facilitate and enable this analysis and discussion. We are very much focusing on best practice and learning from each other. So if we're doing something brilliant in the UK, why do we have to reinvent the wheel in the USA? Or if we're doing something fantastic in Mexico, why do we need to do the same thing, reinvent the wheel in Germany? So it's very much about what is best practice, how do we define best practice, and how do we share it? The organization focuses very much on what we call the developing countries and countries in transition, or what we most commonly talk about today, middle and low income countries. So how can we, countries with higher income, how can we support the rest of the world so the transport sector moves forward overall? And of course, it's great to share best practice, but what are the tools, the guidance, the documents? How can we help people to move forward? So not only sharing best practice, but giving them the tools to implement that best practice. It will all come in the low carbon agenda in a minute. Right, 121 governments around the world are members of the World Road Association. And 140 countries. That means that some of the countries are represented through the public sector. And that means the public sector is putting actual cash into the World Road Association because they see the benefits. We've got about, well over 1,200 people now, technical people who are involved in our technical committees. And I'll explain in a minute how these committees work. But that means that there are more than 1,200 experts from around the world willing to put their free time, their expertise into developing something that moves the sector forward. The wire roads, actually, I don't know if you saw the minister's remarks this morning. So this slide actually summarizes some of the stuff he said, so I'm not going to repeat it. But this is very much a recognition that roads are now recognized not as an infrastructure asset, but as an enabler for economic development and the social well-being of communities. So we shouldn't be looking at roads and the road sector as road engineers, infrastructure. This is a lot more than that. So we have a number of different ways of working in the World Road Association, but how can you find out about it? Well, we've got a really good website. It's been revised very recently. But there you can get information about a number of different technical reports. Some of them go back a few years. Some of them are very recent. So we have reports continuously updated and published. The low carbon transport report has not been published yet, but it will be published in the next month or so, I hope. But we also have seminars, workshops. We run some of them in the UK, some of them in other parts of the world. It's always very interesting to travel around the world to hear about the work. We are starting doing podcasts. We have webinars, so a number of different tools that you can access through the website. There are a number of reports that are not downloadable as a PDF version for free. So please, if you're not familiar with PR, which is the French name of the World Road Association, if you're not familiar with it, do take the time to go and have a look. It's a wealth of information there for experienced people in the road sector, as well as for the people who are coming in as graduates or as apprentices. There is a lot that you can learn from around the world. So, what do we have on the website? I'm not going to go through that in detail, but you will notice that the dictionary made an appearance twice, just because it's very important. The World Road Association has I made a mistake, obviously. 3 different languages. It's French, which is the original language, English and Spanish. So everything that we produce is in all 3 languages. Sometimes one language may appear first before the others appear in the reports, but actually all of them will be in all 3 languages. But we have 8 different languages in the dictionary, which means that when you're doing work and you're trying to either translate or understand what another country is doing, that dictionary can help you, because when we translate, sometimes we make mistakes and we make difficult to understand texts that come from a different language. The dictionary, I found it helpful, particularly when you want to read something that was translated from French or Spanish and it doesn't quite make sense in English. Okay, right, there we are. International seminars, and we had quite a few of them here in the UK, so it's not unusual to see a WRA seminar in the UK. We recently had one in Glasgow that talked about asset management, and we plan to do one exactly on the topic that we're covering today, the low carbon transport in the near future. But the World Road Association has seminars in exotic places like in Mexico. I've just come back from Yokohama in Japan. We had a seminar in Bolivia. And it sounds like exotic traveling, which sometimes it is, but it's valuable information. You do get a lot of information from these seminars that is always worth sharing over here. And sometimes we go with the view that the UK is ahead of everybody else, but you learn a lot from other countries. We also have a magazine that is currently quarterly, but we're looking at perhaps having more specific editions coming more often, and it's now in electronic version as well as the hard copy. I'm sure some of you will have seen the Roads magazine. It's both in French and in English, and it covers interesting topics from around the world. But in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a contribution from the UK in every single edition of the magazine, and that demonstrates leadership from us. Right, now, manuals. We've done a lot of work in the UK on a number of different topics around road policy in developing guidance documents, policy documents, and the DFT has been instrumental in that. Not all of the world is at the same position. So the World Road Association has developed a series of manuals. There are 4 manuals that are published at the moment: road safety, network and operations, road tunnels, and asset management, which was the latest of the version. Actually, Alan, who is on the audience, was one of the main authors of the asset management manual. I would strongly recommend, no matter what your area of expertise in the road sector, to have a look at those manuals, because they give you the international perspective. They place they place the UK on where it sits in the national arena, and they give you a number of really strong case studies from around the world about things that worked well, and actually, amazingly, things that didn't work well. There were a lot of countries that were not shy of accepting, we tried this and it didn't work. We don't do that a lot in the UK. We talk about lessons learned, but very few organizations stand up and say, we tried that and it didn't quite work. The manuals do have examples of what is good and what things people tried but did not successfully complete. So they're all free of charge, and they're all in the different languages, although the asset management is under translation as we speak. HTM4 is one of the two tools that the World Road Association, that PRC manages. HTM4 is a very important tool. It was supported by a lot of the big donor banks, like the multilateral banks, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Development Bank. All of those organizations need to be able to make a fair comparison of the different projects, economic appraisal of projects before they fund them. And they have consistently used HTM4 as the standard model for making those comparisons. HTM4 does the economic evaluation of projects, and it takes into consideration things like social and economic development, as well as environmental consequences, traffic volumes, and so on. So particularly now, as we're trying to look at the wider agenda around low carbon transport, over and above the environmental benefits, but the other benefits, the social and commercial benefits as well, tools like HTM4 provide a valuable source for analyzing schemes and understanding where investment should be going. Right, coming to an end of the presentation about the World Road Association and moving into the main topic, our international congresses are flagship events for the World Road Association. We started in 1969, the first Congress in Germany. Sorry, these are the winter ones. The first one was 1969 in Germany, and the last one was in Gdansk earlier this year, where the UK had an extremely strong presence. And actually, we are at the CIHT theatre today. If you look at Transportation Professional a couple of editions ago, there was a large report about how the UK contributed in the Gdansk conference. Very strong presence, really showing leadership. And the next one of the Winter Congresses is coming up in Calgary in 2022. And again, we've already started planning about the UK presence there. But the bigger event, the World Congress that covers all parts of the road sector, started, the first one was in 1908, the last one was in South Korea in 2015, and the next one is next year in Abu Dhabi in 2019, November 2019 in Abu Dhabi. Keep the dates in your calendar. Hopefully we will see some of you or some of your colleagues in either Calgary or in Abu Dhabi or in both. What I do want to say about Abu Dhabi is one of the themes that will be the main focus will be about what is happening with electric vehicles, the low carbon agenda, and so on. So there will be a big push around that. And the Department for Transport has decided to support the event. So we get not only support from our ministers, but the Secretary of State, but we are going to actually get financial support from the Department for Transport to support our presence in Abu Dhabi. I know we're a small group here, but can I please ask you to talk to your colleagues, and your connections, to your network, about the fact that post-Brexit, the UK wants to have a very strong presence in the international arena, and our government is supporting the work of the WRA in that sense, starting with Abu Dhabi, but subsequent events as well. I did talk about that already, so I'm just going to go through the slide quickly. But I wanted to put up a slide to show you how many countries, different countries, we've got taking part in the national committees. We had our council meeting in Yokohama only about 2 weeks ago, and we admitted 2 new countries, one of them being Bulgaria. I am Greek. Bulgaria is just next door neighbor, so I was very pleased to see that we are expanding presence in Europe. But the World Road Association hasn't lost any membership in the last few years. It has gained memberships. We're currently talking with Colombia about joining. They are not members at the moment. So there is a wealth of knowledge there. You can see that we have different types of countries from all over the world contributing in cash as well as in terms of time and personnel joining. Technical committees is really the heart of the World Road Association, and it is one of the technical committees that led the project on low carbon transport that I'm going to talk about in a minute. They form every 4 years, and they meet regularly there is some traveling involved, but we're using technology more and more to try to be more efficient. They work remotely, but they come together to bring their work forward. Normally, each one of the technical committees will produce a report, some special projects, sometimes manual, like the asset management manual, but they are the force behind the World Road Association. And the task forces and regional task forces are more focused, so they don't follow the 4-year cycle of the technical committees. They do quick and dirty projects to give quick answers to challenges that are more timely. Our strategic themes at this cycle of events, 2016 to 2019. So 2019, the end will be at the Abu Dhabi Congress. Our strategic themes are about management and finance. Absolutely critical. How do we bring the financing of the projects we need in the road sector? Things are changing. Governments are not going to be the sole people, the sole organization financing road projects going forward. Access and mobility, and it is under that theme that the project on low carbon transport has taken place. And intelligent mobility, there's a lot about intelligent mobility here today. What does it really mean on the international agenda? Safety, I don't need to say anything more. Safety is always a key factor in transportation. Infrastructure itself and asset management, which is my pet subject. Asset management comes under infrastructure, and climate change, environment and disasters. And another special project was published last year by the World Road Association, and it was presented at WRA UK last year about how do we plan for unplanned events, for disasters. How do we make sure an organization can be ready for a disaster before the disaster happens? And we had an example of what happened with the bridge closures up in the fourth bridge up in outside Edinburgh a couple of years ago. How did Transport Scotland react to the fact that they lost one of their major infrastructure assets? Right. Why is the UK part of the World Road Association? We consider ourselves to be leaders in the road sector, and we are. And actually attending international congresses reinforces that opinion. We are indeed leading the thinking, the policy, the technology in many parts of the road sector. But that's not all. So we're not going to the World Road Association just to offer. We are going because actually we learn a lot from other countries. We create very strong networks with other organizations, and we've got people that can help us out on a friendly basis when we come across a problem. So for example, Transport Scotland recently about 2 years ago, was doing some work about performance management and performance indicators, and just with a simple email to a technical committee in the World Road Association, we managed to get together the performance indicators from about 30 different countries, national authorities, road authorities from about 30 countries. And that happened within 2 or 3 days because we knew the people. We would have to pay consultancy fees for months to collect that information without the World Road Association, the connections. But most importantly, the Department for Transport supports the World Road Association because it wants to support the vision of the UK to promote the technical expertise and basically support consultancies as well as other types of organizations in expanding their horizons, expanding the client base, and support them to be present on the international arena. And as I said, post-Brexit, with our commitment, with the government's commitment to stay live and open for business on the international arena, that becomes even more important. Any questions on WRA before I go into the actual project? So, electric road systems. One of the special projects, it was a relatively small project. It lasted about 6 months, and the report is due to be published, as I said, very shortly. If it's not, I don't think it's on the website yet, but it's imminently going on the website. Electric road systems, what is this about? So we talked about electric vehicles for a number of years, and there's been a lot of push from government policy to encourage the use of electric vehicles. Until recently, there was funding that was dedicated to support the private sector as well as contribute for individuals that wanted to buy electric vehicles. Some of that funding is disappearing as we're moving into the next budget period. However, the willingness of the government to continue supporting electric vehicles is there. There are, however, challenges and there are blockers. the availability of charging points, the availability of technology, the availability of commercial models to make it a sustainable business is causing some concerns. And we know that actually the take-up of electric vehicles has not been as fast or as successful as the government would have liked to see. And it is now the perception in the government. Actually, there is evidence that the reality is that some of the blockers in making electric vehicles a success are around the availability of recharging points and the cost of them. So electric road systems, you can see the definition there. Electric road systems are systems that provide the capability for vehicles to be charged while on go at normal traffic speeds normally. The project that was carried out by a consultancy called TRL, and I'm sure most of you will know TRL, considered a number of different technologies. I think it was over 10 technologies that were considered overall, but summarize them or group them in three different types. What is called the inductive or wireless, where you have a wireless technology to charge the batteries on the vehicle while it is in motion, and two different conductive types, one that is overhead and one that is conductive rail. I'm not going to go into the details because it's not my area of expertise, but the project looked into detail about how the different technologies work, how ready they are, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of all of those different technologies. The question was, are they all ready in terms of technology? Are they ready to be implemented? What are the blockers? What are the economic implications of introducing that technology? But I will jump straight into one of the conclusions, which will come up in a later slide. The conclusion is that all of those technologies can be implemented from a technology perspective. All of those technologies are currently available, and all of those technologies will provide a viable solution to introducing electric vehicles and contribute towards the low carbon agenda. So that's the fundamental conclusion of the work. I'm going to go through some of the stages of the project just very briefly. Three different tasks were carried out. The first one was a literature review, a desk study, as well as stakeholder engagement through a series of interviews to find out what technology is available, and that is a World Road Association project. So this is not about what's available in the UK, this is what is available around the world. And that is an area where the UK might not be exactly the leaders. There's a lot of work that's done around Europe, around the States. In Mexico, there's been a lot of work in South Korea, around the world, around electric vehicles. So that truly was an international review. Then the second task looked very much at the last point on this list, which is the assessment. Okay, so these are the risk assessments. So these are the different systems that are currently available, but what are the benefits and the disbenefits or the disadvantages of each one of those technologies? How can we make them successful? And what are the risks associated with each type of technologies? And then the third part of the project, which to me is actually the most interesting and something that has not really been done before, looking at the business model. Because it's great to say this technology is available, but what is the business, the commercial model that will make that a success? How are we going to make this technology work? Because technology on its own is not going to bring the solution. And it made some recommendations. As I said, the report will be published shortly. And it breaks my heart to say that, but I am an Atkins consultant, but there is a TRL stand just outside this theatre where there is a live demonstration of the project, so you can go and see a lot more technical detail about the project. I'm going to go through the stage, and you can talk about the recommendations. Very interestingly, on task number one looked at the literature review, what is currently available. You can see that the project looked at countries around the world. So there was a survey where we had online survey with 119 responses, so pretty good return. But there were a number of interviews, and I think the number 13 has now changed. It's not 13, slightly more. But there were interviews. You can see the logos of the companies, but I will read the countries because I don't recognize all of them. So there were interviews from obviously the UK, Sweden, Uganda, from France, the USA, from Israel, South Korea, Mexico, and so on. So really a wide range of different countries, different spectrums of income, contributing to what is the technology that is currently available. what you can find as an outcome from that survey is a very useful interactive map that shows what is the journey in terms of electric road systems in different parts of the world. Not only what technology is used, but what are the stages of development, what are the findings, and live case studies for each one of the projects. I like the acronym TRL, and that is not the TRL consultancy, but I have to read it. It is the technology readiness level. Basically, looking at the different technologies and say which one is ready to be deployed on a scale starting from one where 1 is very low all the way up to 10, where 10 is actually, you can press the button and it works. So the TRL numbers there indicate how well developed some of the technologies are. And generally, the impression or the perception is that the wireless technologies are a bit behind the conductive technologies in terms of readiness. And that does make sense. But there was a lot of discussion about investment that has gone in the different types of technology, and the wireless technology seems to be moving much faster than the conductive technology at this point in time. But do remember that actually in terms of conductive technology there is a lot more experience from the rail sector that we can learn from, whereas the wireless is something that is much newer technology, but developing very, very quickly. The task 2, I'm not going to go through all of those, but the task 2 focused very much on the advantages and disadvantages. So a critical review, okay, so that's the technology out there, that's how it has been deployed, what are the advantages, what are the blockers, what are the common challenges for the different technologies, and what are the advantages of all systems. You will not be surprised to find that advantages are all around environment, very much around the environmental benefits. They are highly automated, they are economically efficient for the user. They are not economically efficient for the road authority, of course. They have an impact on the cost implications on the road authority. There are considerations in terms of the challenges. The challenges are around maintenance, whole life cost, the impact on the infrastructure itself, the cost of implementation to begin with, and some safety concerns. Although the safety concerns are more serious around conductive, particularly conductive rail technology, when you've got live charging points on the network, very similar to the rail. And you can see actually the vast majority of the risks, these are the findings of task 2, the vast majority of the risks are on what we would call the green and amber category, which means low or medium risk. There were very few red risks, high risks that were identified in the study, which actually gives us even more confidence that this is a sort of technology and sort of approach through ERS that we can be following. Right. I'm not going to attempt to explain those diagrams, but I am going to tell you what for me as WRA and actually in the road sector, to me what is very important is that economically and commercially these systems can be viable. But there are things that are missing. Things that are missing around government policy, road authority policy, commercial involvement. So it is feasible to follow the cost-benefit analysis of electric road systems and make them work, but the commercial models need to be investigated carefully, and governments need to put in place the right policy to make those successful. So, in terms of recommendations, there are a series of recommendations. There are some very selective ones here. The low and middle income countries, the main recommendation to them is wait to see what is happening in countries where they can put more investment and follow suit very quickly behind, so don't be left behind. But the recommendations for PIAC, for us, for the World Road Association, which very much continue the good work and keep pushing the agenda. The recommendations about national road authorities, very much around stay on top of the game, make sure you implement, you have a proper implementation plan, but on the right route, so you can't go implementing those sort of solutions throughout the network, give careful consideration to which part of the network would be appropriate for that, run trials and so on. But the vast majority of the recommendations were around national policies and governments around the world. If we are committed to the low carbon agenda, if we are serious about the environment, then we need to put the proper policies in place to make that a success. Conclusion. Well, the key conclusion is what I just said in the previous slide, that ERS is a viable, is a realistic option. It is the way forward for supporting us to move forward with a low-carbon agenda, but there is a lot more work to be done. Technology is moving quickly, so we need to be prepared to adjust for the new technology, and we need to understand the implications of electric growth systems and low-carbon agenda on the infrastructure overall, whole life costing, asset management, and so on. Finally, plug for WRA. Next week in Cardiff, we have a Congress, the UK Congress of the WRA this year. It's focusing very much on what we call cutting the gas, which apparently is not a very good title to use in the USA because it means something different, which we didn't know until we invited an American speaker. But there is a Congress in Cardiff next week investigating the low carbon agenda in quite a lot of detail. We will have representatives there from the 4 main road authorities in the UK, from Highways England, Transport Scotland, the Welsh Government, and Transport Northern Ireland. We will have their most senior people attending a panel discussion in the morning talking about the topics. How do they address the challenges that I've just mentioned for road authorities? We will also have the Department for Transport saying how are they addressing the policy challenge and what they are doing about that. So please do come and join us next week. There will be the technical experts that can give you the detail behind some of the decisions that are made. What I did hopefully today is I gave you an overview what WRA does, why we're interested in the low carbon agenda, why we did a project in electric road systems, and what our main recommendations are. So please find out more about WRA. Please talk to your colleagues and networks about it. We are definitely a very important organization in this changing world in the road sector, and we would like to hear more of you. And come and talk to TRL and us about the low carbon agenda. Any questions? Okay. You will. Sorry, Andy. Sorry.
We've got the petrol engine.
Yeah.
We've already got a sort of a worldwide network of petrol stations, gas stations. So what are your thoughts on how we take an electric vehicle and build up a worldwide network? So if I'm in France and I want to drive to, let's say, Greece, I can do it in my new shiny electric vehicle.
Absolutely. But that is exactly where the global agenda is different these days. When I first moved to UK, I had to drive from the UK to France, and I had to put stickers to my lights on the lights at the front to change the way. All of this has gone now. Things have changed. Things have moved on. The international challenge is very different. It's exactly what you said. If I do buy an electric vehicle that will be charged on an ERS system in the UK, how can I drive it all the way to Poland or Greece or whatever? So this is where the government policy is important. This is where we cannot be making decisions on an individual road authority basis. This is where we need to be working all together. The government is already putting things in place about how do we move from fossil fuels into charging the batteries in the same petrol station. There's work that is done around that. That was not covered by this specific project, but we will be talking about it in Cardiff next week. So some of this thinking is happening. Some of the thinking of how do we involve local authorities and regional authorities into some of the decision that is made about charging points. How do we get involved with the transport planners? How do we understand the consequences of integrated transport? How do we connect electric trains with electric vehicles and we make them run smoothly? So these are questions that are much broader than just about charging points. And you're absolutely right. So we're breaking boundaries between countries, we're breaking boundaries between different parts of the road sector, and we're breaking boundaries between ownership of road authorities, private sector, government, and so on. But it is a really, really fast-changing time. Thanks, Andy. Okay, ladies first.
Hi, Janvi Shah from Atkins. I think, Lila, you talked about the low-income countries, and you talked about this whole thing is driven by governance and political buy-in and all of that. From your engagement with the WRA, where do you see the low-income countries actually even giving a political buy-in or the governance around any of this?
That's a good question. The political buy-in is more challenging, particularly in areas where there isn't political stability. The technical buy-in is easier. Actually, we found that in asset management as well, which is my area. We found that in some of the countries that are supported by World Bank projects, it's much easier to adapt to new technology. We invested, for example, on data collection, particularly on things about road condition, but it will have an impact on low carbon transport. We invested a lot in technology, sophisticated technology, to understand how the asset operates, how it performs, and how road user uses the asset. Well, in some of the low and middle income countries, that technology hasn't been developed yet, and therefore they are more open to suggestions about forget the expensive technology, I'll use my mobile phones and the network information that I have there to try and understand how the users use the network. So there is more willingness to accept the technology. They are more open to fast change. The funding needs to be available, and the political buy-in is the challenge. But that's why the recommendation has been: do not rush, wait until things are a bit more stable, but don't be left behind. But that's where actually intelligent mobility, low carbon transport, that's where it will have the majority of the impact. We saw that we talked about drones here again and again for years and years and years, but where the drones deployment of drones has been most successful was dropping supplies and medicines in remote areas in parts of Africa. That has been actually one of the most successful experiments in uses of drones. According to Radio 4 yesterday.
Alan Taggart from KPMG.
Yeah.
Lila, as always, great presentation.
Thank you.
In terms of WRA and going forward, how do you think you can make them more relevant to supporting the UK highway sector?
We were in Yokohama 2 weeks ago in the council, so there were all of the representative countries were there. And actually, I posed exactly this question, not in the UK, but I said, how does the WRA, that is actually a fairly bureaucratic organization in the way it's run sometimes, how do we make the World Road Association more relevant in the world, and how do we make it more relevant in the UK? We make it more relevant in the UK by shouting about projects like this one. This one, particularly the economic analysis part, is something that has not been done in the world. And yet, it has been done now in the UK by the WRA and with a UK consultancy. That was a World Road Association project and was delivered by a UK consultancy. In fact, I think the vast majority, about 75% of the special projects have been developed by UK consultancies, and that shows where we sit on the world stage. How does it become more relevant here? We stay on top of the game. We use our technical network and the technical committees to find all that excellent work that's happening around the world and share it openly. I think the World Road Association has been very quiet about its work in the UK. People don't know about it. We had funding from Highways Agency when Highways Agency was around, but when Highways Agency moved to Highways England, the funding stopped. And the Department for Transport only started funding WRA earlier this year when we realized what was happening with Brexit, and we saw the World Road Association as a forum, as a vehicle for putting the flag out in the international arena. So we've got the funding, we've got the DFT backing and commitment. We've got the Secretary of State behind us. We need to start shouting a lot louder about what the WRA brings. But we've got the expertise. You've got senior people from around the world sitting around the table, openly sharing what they are doing. You don't get that anywhere else. Yeah.
Talking about making it relevant to UK. My voice is quite high, volume-wise. We were talking about making it relevant to UK, right? All of today, we've heard about major enhancement schemes and smart motorways, Highways England, and all of it, all backed up by DFT and funding, like what a proportion of CapEx budget to it. And then here are the trials. to make it more fit for purpose, future-proof, and all of it. So it is a good opportunity to blend these two together when you've got funding.
Absolutely.
And the buy-in.
Absolutely.
So smart
And
motives.
that is the biggest challenge, actually, because the technical committee is now working in isolation. And I want in the next meeting of the council that is happening in 6 months' time, I'm going to take a paper that says, how do we break the boundaries between committees? We're all very good with boundaries. We do the same where I work, with the same with our clients. We do the same here. We work in our different little theaters. But how are we going to break these boundaries? How are we going to make the low-carbon technical committee work with the asset management committee? Because they face the same problem. You put those conductive rail systems down, you affect the performance of the asset. How are you going to do that if the asset management committee is there and the maintenance committee is there and the low carbon committee is there? We need to break the boundaries. I think people realize that more and more. I was talking to a colleague from Highways England. I was talking to Mike Wilson actually about a week ago, and what he said to me, I didn't know that, was the traffic officer service in the UK came out of a World Road Association meeting with Australians presenting what they were doing on their equivalent traffic officer service in Australia. I'm not saying that it was an Australian idea that we adopted here. What I'm saying is Highways Agency was thinking about traffic officers, but they heard in the WRA meeting what Australia was doing, and they built on that. They learned lessons, they took on board what went wrong over there, and they did it differently here. So why not do the same? Why not do the same with everything else? That's what international experience brings. And because these are all technical people as well as people supported by the government, they all speak very openly and they're proud to share. I've been to many of the technical committees and the national committees where people are proud to share. They would not go there with, my commercial interest, my consultancy work. We go representing our country, well, in my case, a different country. I go there representing the UK, but talking openly and with pride about the work we are doing. I think I'm going to let you go early and go and... No?
Time.
We still have time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody
Are there
else?
more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, Les.
Lila, looking at your slides up there, one of the points that was raised was about the extra pressures that were put on the grid. I was at the IM conference last year. David Wright from National Grid said technology is moving at a great rate, new vehicles, new ideas. When are people going to start talking to us and asking where's this extra energy coming from? With regards to the WRA, looking at the people there from the different transport functions around the UK, are we engaging with the likes of National Grid and so forth to say...
Did. I'm trying to go back in slides, but I don't know how to make this work, so I'm going to stop. Because on the list of people that we did in the survey, the stakeholder engagement, we talked with energy providers from around the world. And that's not the National Grid problem, that's an international problem. We started engaging with them, and actually the electric road systems, that's one of their advantages. It provides a better solution to the demand, energy demand, than the point charges, because we know that point charges is all in the evening, it's all on specific parts of the day, and creates the overload that it creates. Whereas when you do that on a live network, it's better distributed throughout the day. So the demand doesn't change, but the profile of the demand over the day changes, and it provides a better solution to that. But you're right, but it's less is exactly what I said earlier, is we're not thinking about infrastructure user authority. It's completely different now. The boundaries are so blurred, as I said, between countries, between sector, between different parts of the government policy. Thank you. To you. Thanks.